Thank you for joining us. You're in for a big treat this afternoon. Your presenter for this seminar is Abe Avrami Bergman, partner at Eastern Union Funding. Abe is a good friend of mine and fellow Marine Parker, so it's an honor to introduce Abe. I'm sure that if everyone heard of Eastern Union Funding, if you're in the real estate space and you're not living under a rock, Eastern Union is known to have done, I don't want to misquote, but I think over $3 billion in mortgage originations this year and going strong. And we're very proud that Eastern Union happens to be a sponsor or co-sponsor of today's event. So without any further ado, I'd like to call Abe to address you this afternoon.
Thank you, Josh. That was the treat for this afternoon, so hope you enjoyed it. The title of this event, which I found out after was emailed out to, I think, the entire world by my very own marketing department, is when you are inches away from closing the deal of your lifetime, you can't risk having it fall apart because of funding glitches. So I think I'm supposed to talk about what are you supposed to do if your deal is falling apart in the last minute. And it's very simple. Start praying. And hope you enjoyed the speech. I'd rather than focus on what to do if your deal gets to the end of the row and you have problems. Let's try to focus a little bit on the beginning of the process so you don't end up in that position where you're going to run into issues with your deals at the end of a day or two before closing. Now, one thing I don't know about the other speakers, I personally prefer speaking about what you guys and girls want to hear about. So feel free to jump in with questions, feel free to interrupt me. And if I'm boring you, tell me that I'm boring you and tell me what topics you want to talk about. If I know something about it, I'm happy to switch gears. But seriously, if I'm going too fast, too slow, have a question on something I said, don't hold back. Like I said, I'd rather talk about what you want to hear about versus what I think you want to hear about. So, as Josh mentioned, I'm in the mortgage business, so when it comes to real estate, a lot of what I focus on is on the process of getting that mortgage done. And I've doing this now for close to 18 years, and I time and time again see people doing things that really they think is better, and it really ends up causing them a lot more grief. And I'd like to share some of those thoughts with you, and hopefully some of you at least walk away and not end up in situations that cause them problems. So it really starts from day one. I know many of you own real estate already. It starts with your very own due diligence. Forget about the bank. Forget about what the appraiser is going to look at on the property, what the environmental guys are going to look at the property. If you speak to any person who owns real estate, I do own some real estate outside of my mortgage business, and I think one thing that you learn with every single piece of real estate that you look at, that you buy, there's never enough due diligence. And if you're not lazy and you really do your due diligence properly, you're going to know a lot of those issues ahead of time, and you'll end up avoiding a lot of those issues. And the more you talk to people who are seasoned, they'll tell you every dollar you spend on due diligence is worth spending that money. You know, if I got $1 for every time a appraiser called me up and said to me, you know, there's an illegal unit in the building, and then I called up the owner, I said, do you know there's an illegal unit in the building? And the person says, no, I had no idea. I mean, there's something wrong with that if we're already that far down the road, you're in contract, you're hard on contract, and you didn't bother doing that level of due diligence, but surprisingly, it happens quite often. That's just one example. Did you not know about an environmental issue on the property that you should have known about because had you done a basic Google on the address of your property, you would have found out that there was a 500-gallon oil spill there 6 months prior. True story. I'm not making it up. So a lot of the times that we all of a sudden see the fire alarm being pulled 2-3 weeks before the closing, and the client is screaming and saying, my money's hard, if I don't close in 3 weeks, I'm going to lose my deposit. A lot of that is really issues that should have come up front. You know, part of due diligence is your rent's above market or below market. The appraiser should not be the one who's telling you, by the way, the rents in your building are above market. If the appraiser tells you that, you better have a good argument as to why that appraiser is wrong. Because if that appraiser is right, you didn't do your due diligence on the property. And you might say, why is anyone paying above market rents? I can bore you all night with 100 different scenarios where people are in contract on deals where the rents that were being collected on the property were above market. So these are just some small examples where due diligence makes a very, very big part of the difference. You know, have you read through your leases? You're buying a property that has commercial leases in it. Chaim Freund here in the front row is does probably more leases than the whole room combined. If you need any help, you can see him. How many times do you run into an issue down the road where an underwriter for the bank took the time to read the lease, and you get a call and say, you know, you guys are trying to pull a fast one on me. And I said, what was the fast one? There's a cancellation clause in the lease. They can get out with 30 days notice. Now, I don't know what to do. Do I admit that we were trying to pull a fast one, or do I admit to my client being an idiot and he never read the lease that on a property that he's in contract on? So these are some very, very basic things that if people would spend their time doing their due diligence properly, you won't get to have to listen to this speech about what to do when your deal is falling apart at the end of the closing. And I think probably the most important piece of advice that I can give to anyone in real estate, and I'm probably talking to myself at the same time, is almost every person in real estate fools themselves. You get to see a property, you're not emotionally attached, you start working on it, and you spent money, and you already have your equity lined up on the deal. You know, shameless plug, because you used Eastern Equity to some guys I hear. You use them to get your equity. You're all set up, you're all lined up, your deal's ready to go, and something in due diligence tells you that the deal is a mistake. And when we're emotionally involved in a deal, we've put a lot of work, we've put a lot of effort, we've flown on a lot of airplanes to go see a property, we have the financing lined up, the equity lined up, we like the deal, we like the location, and we start ignoring some warning signs that come up late in the game. And some of the advice that I've gotten from very, very seasoned real estate owners is, no matter, you are 5 minutes from the closing table, you need to look at every piece of information and say, if I knew that piece of information on the day I started working on this deal, would I have walked from the deal? And if the answer is yes, you better seriously consider it, because losing $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 in due diligence money is a lot less than losing your entire equity that you went into a deal if the deal turned into a bad deal. So I think when you're talking about the beginning of the project and you're starting out on the project, it's very easy to turn a deal down because of something that you found out about prior to you're in contract, prior to you're hard on the contract, prior to you've done a lot of work on it. But when you find out about it after you're emotionally invested, economically invested, financially invested, physically invested in the deal, it's a lot more difficult to be honest with yourself. And don't fool yourself. I think that's probably a piece of advice that every single person in real estate has to keep on telling it themselves, because we all fall into that trap. So just moving on from there, we all did our due diligence properly. We worked on the deal. It makes sense to us. We like the deal. The returns are there. We feel that we can work the property, bring up the value of the property, all the wonderful things. And now I have to go talk to a lender. Whether you're going yourself to a lender, whether you're going to a broker for a lender, we're not going to debate which is better. You all know my opinion on that. But you're going to talk to a lender, and how, again, focused on that line of reasoning, How do we avoid running into issues down the road? Number one, newsflash, lenders are a lot smarter than we think. You're not going to fool them. They're going to figure everything out. Might take them a little longer than you. Remember, you've been at the property 100 times by the time you showed it to them, but you're not going to fool them. Whatever issues you found out during due diligence, they will find out about it also. Whatever issues you have in your personal credit, they're going to find out about it. They also Google your name, and they Google your partner's name, and they know about the property that you gave back 3 years ago. All these issues that you might have that lenders wake up down the road, they will find out about all of them. And it makes such a huge difference, and this is from personal experience, and some of my brokers are here in the audience. This makes such a huge difference. If you walk in day one to your lender, to your broker, to your financial advisor, wherever you're using, and you say, by the way, here's the deal, here's the pros of the deal, and here are the cons, and here how I want to address the cons. There's a very good chance the lender says, okay, we see you understand the property, you understand the issues, you understand how a lender has to think, and we are willing to work with you on it, and let's see if we can come up with solutions to make the deal work. Now, think about it. If it works, those issues are not going to come up later down the road. If it doesn't work, they are definitely going to come up later down the road. Now, when it comes up later on in the process, the lender's automatic mindset is you were trying to hide it from them. That equals you're a dishonest person. That equals we don't want to do business with you. That is the knee-jerk reaction of a lender. Now, rightfully so. Let's think about it a little bit. You are buying a property because you hope that the value of the property is going to go up. You hope that you're going to have residual cash flow on this property, not only for you, but for your kids, for your grandkids, or you're going to flip it and sell it for a lot of money down the road. You're going to refinance it in 3 years and cash out all your money, and it's all going to be gravy. The lender is getting their 3.5%, 4% interest rate. That's what they're getting on it. Their job is to protect their shareholders, their investors, their money. So the second they feel that there's a reason here that they have a good chance of possibly losing money on this deal, they're running for the hills. They're out the door. So if they feel that somebody was trying to pull a fast one on them, it's not going to work. They'll walk from the deal. When I have to walk in to speak to the chief lending officer in a bank because a loan just got turned down, and they say the loan got turned down because the person had a foreclosure 4 years ago and we don't want to do business with that guy. And I pull out the piece of paper or the email that I showed that to you and I told that to you day one, I have a fighting chance. Yes, every deal ultimately boils down to committee. Will they do the deal? Will they not do the deal? But when I don't have, when he pulls out an application that says we've never had a foreclosure on our name, we've never given back a property, or an application that says the rent in apartment 4F is $2,500 when clearly apartment 4F hasn't been occupied in 22 years because there's no walls, bathroom, or anything in there, and the banker happened to walk into that apartment, I don't have a fighting chance. And everybody can scream, everybody can yell, the deal's dead. You're not going anywhere. So I think that if you started from the first bond, you did your due diligence properly, so you're able to identify where the hurdles are, where the issues are, and then you walked into the lender and you're able to present a very cogent case. Here are your issues, here are your problems with the deal, and here's how we're willing to address the deal. You have a total different result. The lender says, this guy is straightforward, this person is honest, this guy knows his deal, this guy did his work on this deal, and this is the kind of guy we want to do business with. You have a much better chance of never having the issues, and if there are issues that come up, at least you have a fighting chance of winning on those issues. So I think the putting it out there and bringing these points up front is going to change your results, and once again, you don't end up at that point where you have issues down the road. As an aside, the banking world, the lending world, is a very, very small industry. The lender that you're dealing with today that works for Investors Bank is working for Popular Bank next week, or is working for a different bank in 2 years from now. And you constantly see these lenders moving around. If the lenders don't move around, they all go to the same events, the same banking events, the same regional banking events. They talk to each other and say, do you know, I just met this guy, and you know what he tried pulling on me? Oh, that's his name? Mental note. I'll remember, I don't want to do business with that guy. How many times have I sent in a deal to a lender, and a lender, completely unrelated, said, that fellow had a problem with Astoria Bank, didn't he? Right? They know about it. It's a very, very small world. Definitely when they move into another bank, they are going to remember the person who tried pulling a fast one, who was not polite to them, who didn't work with them, who didn't talk to them nicely. They're going to remember that. They have almost all lenders, we'll get to it in a second, they don't have a benefit of doing business with you for the most part. And by you burn one bridge, that bridge could be a pretty big bridge. So just as an aside, forget about the particular deal on the table, just realize those lenders are people if you're staying in this industry, you're going to run into them again. And I think it's important when I'm saying present things to the bank is start understanding, it helps people get so much further, is understand the other side of the table. Just like you can understand the seller wants the highest price he can get from the most likely source that's going to close the business, and you want the lowest price you can get on the property with the highest leverage, right? We all can pretty much understand it. It's pretty simple, right? Lower price, we make more money. Higher price, as a seller, you make more money. But the lender, probably 80+% of lenders that you deal with are not compensated based on the amount of business they do that year. Definitely, even if that person at the front door is compensated based on the amount of business he does that year, the processors, the credit analysts, the underwriters, the people on the board who have to approve your deal, none of them are compensated. The only thing that happens to them, if they do a bad deal, they get called in, yelled at, screamed at, and possibly lose their job. So what's their incentive? Their incentive is they got to do enough business that they can keep their job, which the last probably 15 years, except for 1 or 2 years in the between, was not the issue that they had because there's been so much volume in the market. So they don't have they're not really that concerned about hitting their value, right? The one thing they're concerned about is doing a bad deal. They're never going to get yelled at, why'd you come into committee and advise us not to do the deal because you found something bad. They'll get yelled at for coming into committee and sticking up and saying, do the deal, and then it turns out to be bad. So when you start understanding their mindset, is you better give them a case that's ironclad that they are not going to end up in the mud, and you laid out a good thing. I think part of that in presenting the deal is, and I won't be shameless about this one, and this is frankly the difference between a broker and doing a deal yourself. I'm not here to debate when it is the right thing to do, when it's not, but just understand that value of there's hundreds and hundreds of banks out there in the market, right? Depending where you are, whether in New York, there's a lot more. If you're in a little bit more rural area, there's always a lot more than one bank in the market that you can do business with. No individual investor can know every bank and what their hot buttons are, right? So walking into a bank and you have an issue on a deal with the sellers not providing you tax returns, right? And one bank requires tax returns. Another bank doesn't require tax returns. Pretty easy to find out up front if they're going to require it or not. Obviously, if you can't get them, you're not going to go with that bank. But are you going to know which bank is understanding of how real estate works, and when they look at tax returns, they look at the top line to look at the revenue on the building, and they understand the seller probably stuffed as many expenses as he possibly could into that property. His wife's car, his wife's cell phone, his kid's cell phone, his kid's car, a salary to his kids. He probably did whatever he can to reduce his taxable liability and to increase his expenses. So certain lenders are going to look at it and say, okay, revenue matches the revenue you're telling me, and we can do this deal. Other lenders are looking at the bottom line on your tax return. Believe it or not, we have lenders that we have to explain that to them, right? And we have lenders we have to explain that you have to add back depreciation. There's a lot of, everybody has their way of looking at things, and what's the hot button, what's the hot topic? They just got, I did a loan for a guy a long time ago. It was a retail construction loan, and there was a delay because the city put a stop order. There was a lot of politics involved. There was a stop order for a very, very long time. It was a small loan. It was an $800,000 loan on a $3 million project that my client had over $2 million into the project, and my client had, the two partners in the deal had a very, very significant net worth. Frankly, nothing to be concerned about. They were personally guaranteed on the loan, and the lender was driving us crazy. to the point that my client went ahead and wrote them out a check for $800,000 and paid them off just to be left alone. And it was very early on in my career, and I didn't understand why they drove them so crazy. And then I learned something new. They had just started a foreclosure process on a construction loan for a retail property directly across the street from the property that we were. So this was just nightmarish for them. Here they did 2 retail construction loans in the same neighborhood, and they were both having issues. The issues were completely unrelated to each other. The reason that guy went into bankruptcy had nothing to do with the issues at this property. But it's understanding where your lender's mindset is. At least you'll know to who's the right lender for your deal, who's the wrong lender for your deal. The fact that the lender takes the deal in up front, he doesn't yet know every intricacy, and because after this speech we all did our due diligence properly, we do know every intricacy. So we can know where the issues will be, and we need to know, is that a hot point by the lender or not? You have the lender that requires personal tax returns, a lender that doesn't require personal tax returns, so on and so forth. There's a lot of different details that are a lot more important by one lender and not by the next. Trying to understand those things will at least help you get to where you what you want to go to. I think just a few points along those lines. When you get onto, and I can tell you personally from having dealt with lenders and clients, and a lot of times introducing my clients to the lenders and having them talk to each other. When a client walks into a lender, or an owner walks into a lender, and he can answer every question, and he can describe the deal, and he can say why it's a good deal, why it's a bad deal, what's good about the deal, what's the rents in the market, here are your comps. When you walk in and you know your deal, automatically the person across the table has a completely different level of confidence in you. The next person walks in, and could be he knows the deal just as well, he's just not that good of a person to present the deal, and he's like, yeah, it's a good deal. Why is it a good deal? I've been in the neighborhood for a long time. I know it's a good deal. It creates an entire different result. How do you, end of the day, you are who you are, right? You either know how to explain something well, or you don't know how to explain something well. So what do you do about it? Yeah, by us in the office, we talk a lot about partnering up with people that their strengths are your weaknesses, and your weaknesses are their strengths, and the same thing both ways. In today's day and age, a lot of people like to talk about change, right? You should change who you are, you should change what you do, you should get better. Personally, none of us are changing, right? Our strengths are our strengths, our weaknesses are our weaknesses, we're never gonna change them. And guys in my office are shaking their head because they hear it from my partner 100 times a day. They're sick and tired of hearing it, but too bad. You're gonna have to hear it again. The reality is we're not changing. So if you're a great analyst, but you're not a great guy at explaining your deal, either get a partner that is great at explaining your deal, use a broker is great, use an accountant, recognize what you are good at, and partner up with people. When I say partner, it doesn't necessarily mean to a principal, but align yourself with people that are really, really good at what you're not good at. You're not going to all of a sudden become good at something else. I know that I cannot sit and read through 30 leases cover to cover. I will go out of my mind. I have an attorney who has no problem staying up all night and reading leases word for word. I would make it through I can brew myself the biggest pot of coffee. I'll be about halfway through the pot and I'll be sleeping on that lease. There's no way I can do it. You want me to walk around the property and talk to your tenants and figure out where the problems are and who's happy and who's not happy? I'm the guy for it. My attorney probably do a very bad job at it. He might even sue a couple of them by the time he's done. So you have to know where you shine and where you don't shine, and align yourself with brokers, with partners, with people in your office, with accountants, with financial advisors who shine at what are your weaknesses. A lot of it in getting a deal done is painting that picture. Paint the right picture, and they're going to buy the picture. If the picture doesn't look good, it could just be on the surface it doesn't look good, but go back to what we said. The lender is not then incentivized to necessarily do your deal. I think you get what you pay for when it comes to professional services. recently were involved in a deal, and we were talking about two different architects. One of them wants $80,000 for what is a relatively simple job, and the other one wants $18,000 for the very, very same job. And we were fighting who we should go with. The obvious answer is go with the $18,000 guy. It's not that complicated of a job. When we realized that if the better architect gets it done 30 days sooner, and he manages on one or two other things to get a waiver on, we would save about $150,000. So now who's better to use? So you ultimately, end of the day, get what you pay for. We're talking about getting deals done, moving them forward. By the way, I was serious about the questions offer, so if anybody wants to jump in, feel free, raise your hand. I'm going to wrap up soon and open up the floor to questions. Timing. How many of you have had a deal die because you pushed it off a day? Now, usually when I ask that question, there's somebody in the audience who raises his hand and said, yes, I had a deal die because somebody jumped in and signed the contract the day before I did. It's not what I'm talking about. That's probably a deal that you're better off that you didn't end up buying, because you gotta believe in God that He didn't want you to buy the deal. But when I talk about timing, in the market today, and at all times, but specifically today, the difference between closing a deal and not closing a deal can literally be hours. So when the banker, your broker, says, I need you to send me in your rent roll, don't say I'll do it tomorrow. Do it today. Now, I sound crazy. One day is going to make a difference on the deal. I was under application. That wasn't my own deal. It was a client. It's going back to 2006. I had a client who owned a property. He had $1.2 million loan on it, and we were getting him a $12.6 million loan on the property. Not a bad day. It's work. $11 million cash out. I think he owned the property in the family for about 70 years, so this was all icing on the cake. He even negotiated my fee. He was only paying me 2 points on that deal, so all right, I just checked if you guys were listening. And he calls me up one day. I'd asked him for the tenant estoppel on the deal. Now, the bank was rushing us to close. They wanted to get it in before the quarter, and he was dragging his feet. I called him up. I said, why are you dragging the feet? The only thing left to close is the tenant estoppel. And he finally breaks down. He admits it to me. He says he had a loan from a bank that you had to pay interest at the end of the month. It's not so uncommon. Most banks don't do that, but there are plenty of banks who do it. That if you pay off the loan on the 15th of the month, you have to pay your interest to the end of the month anyway. That's in their loan documents. So he figured out that if he closes on the 15th instead of on the 1st, he spent $2,200 extra. He was cashing out only $11 million, and he was bothered by this $2,000. I tried talking him out of it, and I got no place. Okay, this was on the 15th of the month. I said, send me the estoppel. He says to me, nope, I'm not asking for the estoppel because the bank is trying to rush me. I don't want to rush because I don't want to pay that $2,000. I'm going to blame it that the tenant didn't give me the estoppel yet, and this way we got to delay. I couldn't win with him. On the 16th of the month, he got into a fight with his tenant over something. On the 17th, he sent them the estoppel, thinking, I can have a fight with them from today to tomorrow. They have to sign the estoppel. They signed the estoppel, and then the lawyer added 3 handwritten lines to the bottom of the estoppel. The tenant has discovered a crack in the foundation of the building. We think it's the landlord's responsibility to repair this crack, and therefore we believe that the landlord is in violation of his contract with us, and we're paying rent on the protest. So they didn't lie. They said that they're up to date on their rent, which they were. And the lawyer took this estoppel instead of sending it to me, which I would have at least tried to fight with them and called the landlord and say, hey, you better, whatever you're fighting with them about, you better wrap this up. They sent it directly to the bank's attorney. The deal was dead. They fought about it for 3.5 years. The tenant never left, never stopped paying. The whole thing was just a way of holding him up. He lost out on his $11 million cash out. Now, mind you, when he did go to refinance it was 2008. For those of you that were around will understand that 2006 and 2008 was not exactly a trade-off. And the worst part about the story is I didn't get paid. So whether you're on the broker side or you're on the owner side, it is true. A couple of days, a couple of hours can actually make a difference. But I started off with today's day and age, it's much worse. Rates are moving. For those of you who didn't realize that, I think Josh said before, some of us might be living under a rock. Rates are moving upwards. And if rates are moving upwards, the difference between your deal closing today and closing tomorrow could be significant difference in the amount of proceeds. It could be a difference in the interest rate you're paying. It could be a difference between your deal being able to close or not. We've seen deals that worked a year ago that today don't even work for the unpaid principal balance on the property. Why? Because interest rates are higher and debt service coverage is debt service coverage. So timing is everything today. It's going to make a huge difference. But it's more than just interest rates, and it's more than just interest rates and unknown issues that come up in a deal. The market is changing. Banks' appetites change. They can come in one morning and say, we no longer want retail, we no longer want multifamily, we no longer want office space. And we'll fight with the bank and we'll say, hey, but you gave the guy a term sheet and you have to honor it. And they said, yeah, you're right, we do, except our committee doesn't really have that personal relationship that we have with you, nor do they have a personal relationship with the client. And they read the term sheet. The term sheet said this is non-binding and therefore they don't have to honor it. And we see it happen. A lender's in the market today and is out of the market tomorrow. The loan's committed. There's nothing they can do about it if that's the issue. They have to close the loan. But if the loan's not committed, they will pull out of deals. And then you're scrambling to go find yourself a new lender. You wasted money, you wasted time, you wasted everything. To top it all off, you have regulatory changes. When I say regulatory changes, banks are looked at today, are scrutinized more than any other industry in the world. And I say that with confidence. And you have every day of the week the regulators coming into a bank and saying we don't like your numbers anymore, we don't want you to lend anymore to multifamily properties. And everybody in this room thinks it's the most ridiculous thing that the regulators are saying, because why wouldn't you want to lend? Multifamily is the safest property out there. They want them to lend on office, they want to lend them on owner-occupied properties. Why would they not want? Don't try to equate regulation and logic. It's two separate things. They're unrelated to each other. Government regulation and logic, I am never known to be politically correct. Government regulation and logic do not go hand in hand. When I, early on in the business, when I started doing healthcare finance, a good friend of mine sat me down and he said, let me teach you how to do a HUD loan, because I had never done one at that time. Don't be scared about trying something new. I'll tell you a secret about myself. Hopefully that client's not in the room. My first construction loan we closed, I found out at the closing that there's this whole drawdown schedule thing. Up until then, I actually thought they just write him a check and everything goes away. But I did close the loan, and he doesn't know that I didn't know anything about it. So it worked out. But when you're doing a HUD loan, for those of you who have done it, you know that logic and regulation don't necessarily go together. So to the point, your deal is under application with a bank, and the regulators come in and they say, no more multifamily, even though it makes absolutely no sense. That bank is not physically possible for them to close your loan. So timing is huge today. It always was because of the unknown, but today more than ever, timing is huge. I can tell you from personal experience, we were in the market when it came 2007, 2008. In the first quarter of 2008, fees equivalent to what I closed in the entire 2007 died in the first quarter. Now, thankfully, we had the rest of the year to work and try to make up for it, but that was really just market changes that basically decimated the entire pipeline. You don't want that to happen on the deal that you're under contract, have a couple $100,000 or a couple of $1 million up hard on contract. Now, the topic of this speech was what to do when you're faced with issues on the last minute of your closing. So I tried to talk about how not to get there, but what do you do when you are there? It does ultimately happen. A couple of quick pointers, and this is, they're probably pretty simple, but maybe if you hear them, you'll actually follow them. Number one, logic rules for the most part. Having a meeting with the banker where your client gets onto the phone or gets in person and the client says, "But you promised me," doesn't mean anything to the banker. But I'll never do business with you again. It also doesn't work with the banker. When you tell them, and I'm going to tell everybody in the community that I shouldn't do business with you, also, believe it or not, doesn't work with the banker. Logic, for the most part, at least has a chance of working. If an issue comes up, the committee comes back and says, we don't want to do this deal, or we're turning the deal down, or we're changing the terms of the deal, for whatever reason they're coming back, at least try to understand the reason and come back with an argument or a solution to the reason. We just found out that one of your major tenants is filing for bankruptcy. That's a legitimate issue, right? Because we're about to have 20,000 square feet vacant in the building. Or we potentially will if they can't pay their rent. So saying that, but don't worry, they do very well. I was there on Sunday afternoon and the parking lot was full. That's not a logical argument. They're filing for bankruptcy because they're losing money. So, a fellow I know owned a company, had $1 billion in sales, and they've unfortunately had to file for bankruptcy. He said the best question he got asked was, how did a company with $1 billion in sales file for bankruptcy? And he said the answer was pretty simple. We spent $1.1 billion. So, you know, arguing with the bank, something that you yourself wouldn't buy that argument. If you were not in contract on that deal, if you didn't already own that property, and somebody would have come to you and say, hey, you want to buy this property, the tenant is going bankrupt, you wouldn't have accepted that argument that, hey, Sunday the parking lot is full. What argument would you have accepted? Think of an argument that you would have accepted and make that argument to a bank. You know what? If you put $100,000 in reserves for TIs and leasing commissions until we find a new tenant, or I will sign a master lease, at least attempt to come up with a logical argument, you have a chance of getting the deal done. Remember, going back to what we said, if the banker doesn't like you already, you have a less chance of logic winning because now he has a way of telling you to leave and not come back, right? So all these things that you build up to, where you presented a good project to the bank, you acted nicely to him, you treated him like a human being, could make a big difference in that last-minute issues. One thing to understand, if your issue that they're coming up with is regulatory, you're not going to win with logic. We just said that. But, you know, I'll give you an example. A client had presented a construction loan that he claimed in his presentation, he said that he had $8 million in purchasing the land, right? It was his presentation, not ours. And about 3 weeks before closing, the bank realizes that he didn't have $8 million in there. He actually partnered up with a fellow as the value of the land. It was, I don't know, very complicated. I'm still scratching my head trying to figure out how we got to the $8 million. There's a rule. You need to have 15% cash equity. No bank is giving you an 85% loan, but there's a law which actually applies in certain cases. You need to have in a construction loan 15% cash equity. You can have all the logic in the world. You inherited the property on Madison Avenue from your great-grandmother who paid $50,000 for it and is worth $80 million now, and you're only borrowing $20 million. It doesn't make a difference because you only have $50,000 in cash in the deal. You need to have 15% cash equity. So, and using this just as an example, if you have a regulatory issue that they're coming up with, you better figure out how do you comply with the regulation, because logic is unfortunately not going to win. And the strongest argument, the best argument that we ever made goes back to the thing we started with. If we're able to show that the facts that they're raising as an issue right now, we vetted day one, at least to a certain point, that combined with logic has the strongest argument where you're able to say to the lender, you knew about this, you okayed it, I understand your issue, but here's how we're addressing it. They have a much harder time, definitely, if they want to continue the relationship with the people, they have a much harder time in being able to say why they're not. So I think just to summarize, I'm glad to see most of you still awake. Just to summarize what we said. There's nothing more important than your initial due diligence up front. If you don't know your own deal, you're going to run into issues down the road. Be honest and open. Tell the bankers what's going on. Tell the bankers the issues with the deal. Use good providers. Pay if your accountant is not good, you're going to have issues. Use a good accountant. Has to be good for what you need. Use a good lawyer. Yes, I've had clients who have asked for, oh, the bank makes me have a lawyer. Can you find me a lawyer that's very, very cheap? You get what you pay for. And 9 out of 10 times, you didn't need a good lawyer. But that one time, he's going to save you a lot more money than you saved on the other 9 times. I had a client who was a lawyer himself, and I always asked him why he used a lawyer for closings. I said, why don't you just do it yourself? And he never really gave me a good answer. One time we had a closing, he was buying a 2-story building in Manhattan. It was a through-and-through building. It was 200 feet long. He was paying a lot of money for the building. The reason he was buying the building is because there was air rights to build 14 stories above that building. That's why he was buying the building, not for the 2 stories. So he had 14 stories by 50 feet wide by 100 feet long. That was his buildable air rights. I'm assuming there was some setbacks, but just you can imagine the size of his air rights. At the closing, his lawyer's face, I saw this with my own eyes, his lawyer's face turns white like a ghost. I've never seen it. And he turns to my client and he says, we have a problem. He says, what's the problem? He said, I just realized that there's a 4-foot easement on each side of the building. That's 8 times 200 times 14. Any mathematicians in the room? I don't know the number, but it's a lot of money. When you're paying $375 a buildable square foot, you can do 375 times 8 times 200 times 14 and figure out the number of what it is. And he was $9 million hard on contract on the deal. And he had to close. He had no choice. He turned to me and he said, Abe, now you know why I use a lawyer. His malpractice, not mine. But that's the reason why you're using a lawyer. This fellow is a huge real estate owner. He probably closed hundreds of real estate deals. I imagine that he didn't have this on every single one of his deals. But what he just saved himself by having good counsel from a good firm who was going to have to deal with this issue. And there was a lawsuit, and the end of the story is not important. But end of the day, there's a reason that you pay for good providers. Real estate is all about location, location, location. Closing is all about timing, timing, timing. The faster if your broker calls you up and says, I need this information, get him the information. Your banker asks you, get her the information. There's nothing I can tell you in this market that we in our office, we bought down in the last year, in the last 9 months, our average closing time from application to closing is down by 9 days. 9 days, big deal. We will put hours and hours and hours of work to try, and more staff to try to figure out how to get deals closed faster, because we do know that there are deals that are not going to close because they drag. And it's well worth the time. Don't waste the time. I had a client recently who said, oh, I'm on vacation. Can we do the appraisal next week? I said, no, get somebody else to be there for the appraisal. And we did the appraisal. Did that make a difference or not? I don't know if it made a difference on that deal, but that's the mentality, the attitude you have to have today on your deals. And the last point we made is deal with your issues head on. Don't try to sweep them under the rug, and try to deal with them logically. Logic will generally win. And that's, I have a lot more to say, but not on this topic. I'm happy to take questions from the audience. I'm happy to take questions afterwards. I'm going to leave cards up here, so anybody who wants to email me, call me. My cell phone is the only place to reach me. My office number is on the card, but I only give that to people that I don't want to talk to. So call me on my cell phone, email me. If anyone has any questions that they think everybody would benefit from, I'm happy to take them. I was told that they lined up some hecklers in the room. So far, you guys have been lame, you know. Anyone? Oh, we got in the back.
If there is a funding glitch, where do you recommend your clients to go to get the additional funding that they need? What are the options?
If there's a funding?
If there's a funding glitch, like instead of the topic.
So it's
the secret to get that funding?
Okay, so there's a lot of different options. We weren't discussing that over here, but end of the day, you run into an issue. There's a lot of bridge lenders. One thing that's much stronger in the market today than it was at any point in my career is the amount of bridge money out there and the cost of that bridge money. Cost of bridge money has come down drastically in the market. Yes, there's still the 12 and 2s out there for certain kind of deals. You need to close very fast. It's a smaller deal. There's 6 and 7% bridge money available out there as well that can turn around and close things very, very quickly. So there is a very robust bridge lending market today out there. There's a lot of equity brokers out there. There's equity, there's bridge, there's mezz. There are a lot more options. And if you've watched the industry in the last 20 years, what used to only be available for the very, very big boys, people have learned, say, hey, if it works for there's no reason it shouldn't work for us. So a lot of sophisticated tools to get deals closed are available for even your average normal size deal today. But if you have to scramble, you need to close a deal in 2 days, it's going to cost you. Just keep in mind, when I started in the business, the 12 and 2s were 16 and 2. So it's not so bad, the 12 and 2. And it's short-term money, and think it through.
How are banks dealing with residential?
No, go ahead. I'm listening to you. Shh.
How are residential? A lot of them became very popular today. That a lot of residential buildings, what they do is do next gross leases for higher leases in order to get higher. Are the banks aware of it?
The banks are very, very aware of it. And that is a classic of, I think I'm going to sweep it under the rug and they're not going to realize. I saw somebody, we didn't send this out. Guys in the back, conversations out, I'm sorry, some people are just asking questions. We had someone came to us where all his new leases were 13-month leases. So he assumed everyone would just divide it by 12. They had a gross number on the lease, but when you read it, it was really 13 months. The banks are definitely, when you're dealing with a little bit more expensive leases, they're much more. Nobody's expecting to see that on a $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 lease. When you're talking about $3,500 all the way up to the $14,000, $15,000 leases, they'll absolutely look for it today. They're going to go based on the lower amount. Now, I understand why a landlord is possibly doing that. Maybe he doesn't want to officially lower his rent for marketing purposes. Down the road, he thinks the market will get stronger. He'll be able to get that. I'm not saying not to do it, but but to sort of just put it into the lease, into the rent roll, and say I'm getting $7,400 a month when really you're net getting $6,800. It's not going to fly. 99.9% of the time, they're going to realize it. I think 100% of the time, it's probably bank fraud, and you shouldn't do it. And I'm a very big proponent of not doing bank fraud. The easiest way to become a rabbi or a priest is to commit fraud and go to jail. The New York Post will ordain you immediately, and you've made it in life. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you very much. There's some cards up here if anybody wants them.